Lady Annalise Vance believed the world was made of shadows. She did not mean this in a poetic sense, though she was fond of poetry. She meant it quite literally. The corner of the library where she now sat, for instance, was a masterpiece of interlocking shades. The heavy velvet curtains bled a deep plum darkness onto the floorboards, a darkness that was softened to a dusty grey where it met the weak afternoon light filtering through the tall windows. The spine of a forgotten book cast a shadow sharp as a knife's edge. Her own hand, holding a stick of charcoal, threw a softer, more complex shape onto the creamy page of her sketchbook. She was capturing the way the light fell across a bust of some long-dead Roman, tracing the gentle curve of shadow beneath its marble chin. It was her only solace at these dreadful house parties her uncle insisted they attend. Sir Reginald Vance believed in circulation, not of the blood, which in his case ran sluggish and thick, but of his only niece. He wished to see her circulated, presented, and ultimately disposed of in a profitable match. "There you are," his voice boomed, shattering the quiet cathedral of her concentration. "Hiding again. Do you mean to grow roots in this chair, girl?" Annalise did not look up, her fingers tightening on the charcoal. She added a faint smudge to the statue's cheekbone. "I am not hiding, uncle. I am observing." "Observing what? Dust motes? The slow decay of leather bindings?" He loomed over her, his own considerable bulk blocking the light, plunging her page into a flat, uninteresting gloom. "Your cousin Thomas has been looking for you. He wishes to partner you for the evening's cotillion." Her hand stilled. The thought of Thomas's damp palm on her back, of his breathy, self-satisfied pronouncements in her ear, made a sour knot form in her stomach. "I have a headache," she said, the lie thin and worn from overuse. "You will have a life of headaches if you do not play your part," Sir Reginald snapped, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hiss. "The estate is mortgaged to the hilt. My generosity is not infinite. Thomas is a sound, practical solution. Do not be a fool, Annalise." She finally looked up at him, her grey eyes calm and clear. "It is a poor solution that feels more like the disease than the cure." Her uncle's face purpled. He was not a man who appreciated wit, especially from a woman who depended entirely upon his goodwill. Before he could deliver the retort simmering on his lips, another voice, quiet and measured, cut through the tension. "I believe the lady is attempting to capture the chiaroscuro. Your presence is rather disrupting the effect." Both Annalise and her uncle turned. A gentleman stood a few feet away, leaning against a bookshelf. He was not remarkable at first glance. His coat was of a good but not fashionable cut, his cravat simply tied. He was tall, with dark hair and a face that was more compelling than handsome, all sharp angles and quiet intensity. He held a slim volume of essays in one hand, his finger marking a page. It was his other hand, resting on the shelf, that caught her artist's eye. A thin, silvery scar traced a path from his knuckles to his wrist, a delicate flaw against the tanned skin. Sir Reginald puffed out his chest, affronted. "And you are?" he demanded, his tone dripping with the disdain of a man of established, if crumbling, lineage for an unknown face. The stranger's gaze did not waver. It rested on Annalise's sketchbook. "Merely an admirer of fine art," he said, his voice a low baritone, "and a guest of our host. My name is Beaumont." The name meant nothing to Sir Reginald. He grunted, a sound of dismissal. "Well, Mr. Beaumont, my niece has duties beyond smudging paper. Come, Annalise," he gestured impatiently. Annalise felt a flicker of defiance. She looked from her uncle's florid face to the stranger's quiet one. She gave Mr. Beaumont a small, polite nod. "You are correct, sir. The light has changed." She closed her sketchbook, the soft thud of the cover sounding like a final, small defeat. She rose from her chair and, without another word, followed her uncle from the library, leaving the stranger to his books and the shadows to themselves. She did not look back. She had no reason to. He was simply a man in a library, a momentary distraction. The next morning, the butler announced a visitor. "His Grace, the Duke of Blackwood," he intoned, his voice trembling with the weight of the title. Annalise was arranging some wilting flowers in the morning room, a task of tedious domesticity her uncle had assigned her. Sir Reginald, however, shot to his feet, smoothing his waistcoat and wearing an expression of avaricious shock. The Duke of Blackwood was a titan of the peerage, a man of immense wealth and power, famously reclusive and unmarried. His presence in this county was the subject of endless gossip, but no one had expected him to make a call at their modest rented manor. The Duke entered the room, and Annalise's hands froze above a pale rose. It was him. It was the man from the library. Mr. Beaumont. He was dressed today in immaculate tailoring, the severe, perfect lines of his coat emphasizing the breadth of his shoulders. He looked every inch the aristocrat, but his face was the same quiet intensity, the same compelling angles. He met her eyes for a brief, unreadable moment before turning his attention to her uncle. Sir Reginald was bowing so low he was in danger of toppling over. "Your Grace." What an unexpected, what an immense honor. To what do we owe this great pleasure? The Duke did not waste time on pleasantries. His gaze was direct, his purpose clear. "Sir Reginald," he began, his voice the same calm baritone she had heard yesterday, though it now carried an unmistakable weight of command. "I have come to request your permission to pay my addresses to your niece, Lady Annalise." The silence that followed was so profound that Annalise could hear the frantic beating of her own heart. The wilting rose slipped from her fingers and fell to the floor. Her uncle stared, his mouth agape, his mind clearly struggling to connect the fabulously wealthy Duke of Blackwood with his quiet, overlooked, sketchbook-filling niece. Annalise felt a dizzying sense of dislocation. The man who had spoken a few words to her in a library, who she had dismissed from her mind entirely, was now proposing courtship? It made no sense. It was like a scene from a poorly written novel. She looked at him, truly looked at him, trying to find some sign of jest, some hint of madness. She found nothing but a steady, serious gaze. Sir Reginald found his voice first. It was a strangled, ecstatic squawk. "My permission. Your Grace, you have it. Of course you have it. Annalise, my dear girl, the Duke." The Duke's eyes were on her. "Lady Annalise," he said, his tone formal, "I hope my suit is not unwelcome." She could not find her voice. She could only nod, a small, jerky movement. Unwelcome? It was impossible. It was absurd. It was the most bewildering thing that had ever happened to her. The most powerful man she had ever met had just asked to court her, and she had no idea why. Their courtship was a strange, formal affair. The Duke, Ballister, as he insisted she call him in private, was impeccably correct. He called upon her at the proper hours. He sent her extravagant bouquets of flowers that dwarfed her uncle's sad little arrangements. They took chaperoned walks in the garden and sat in stiff silence in the parlor. He was a perfect gentleman and a perfect stranger. She felt as though she were playing a part in a play for which she had never read the script. Her uncle was insufferably triumphant, her cousin Thomas sullen and resentful. Society buzzed with the news, their collective astonishment a palpable force. Annalise, the quiet Vance girl, the wallflower, had somehow ensnared the great prize of the season. No one could fathom it, least of all Annalise herself. She watched him constantly, her artist's eye trying to piece together the puzzle of him. He rarely smiled, but when he did, it was a small, private thing that barely touched his lips. He spoke little of himself, preferring to ask her questions about her interests, her drawing, her thoughts on the books he sent her. He listened with an unnerving stillness, his focus absolute. It was this focus that she found most unsettling. When he looked at her, she felt seen in a way that was both terrifying and thrilling. One afternoon they were seated in the garden, a grim-faced lady's maid hovering a respectable distance away. The silence in the air stretched between them, thin and fragile like a pane of spun sugar. "May I see it?" he asked abruptly. Annalise blinked. "See what, Your Grace?" "Your sketchbook," he clarified. "The one from the library." A knot of apprehension tightened in her chest. Her sketchbook was her private world, a place of unfiltered observation. It was filled not with pretty landscapes, but with studies of character, the slump of a weary footman's shoulders, the grasping curve of a society matron's fingers, the intricate web of shadows on a sleeping face. It was too honest for public viewing. "It is nothing, really," she demurred. "Just idle scribbles." "I doubt that," he said simply. His gaze was not demanding, but it was persistent. Hesitantly, she retrieved the book from the basket at her side and passed it to him. He opened it with a surprising reverence, his long fingers careful with the pages. She watched his face as he turned each leaf, her breath held tight in her throat. He did not linger on the landscapes or the architectural studies. He paused on her portraits. He studied the sketch of the gossiping ladies, their heads bent together like vultures over a kill. He looked at the drawing of a young boy crying in a corner, his face a mask of misery. He stopped at the final drawing she had been working on in the library, the bust of the Roman. He traced the line of shadow under the chin with his finger, the one she had been so focused on. "You see things as they are," he said, his voice quiet. He looked up from the book, his eyes, a deep, warm brown she now realized, the color of rich earth, meeting hers, not as they are meant to be. It was the first time anyone had ever understood her art. It was the first time anyone had ever truly seen her. A strange warmth spread through her chest, a feeling so unfamiliar she could not immediately name it. It was hope. The hope was a fragile, tender thing, easily bruised. Her family seemed determined to stamp it out. Sir Reginald, having secured the Duke, was now consumed with the marriage settlements, his greed a foul odour in every room. Thomas, however, was another matter. His resentment festered, turning into a petty, cruel campaign against her. He made snide remarks just loud enough for her to hear, hinting that she had employed some sort of trickery to trap the Duke. He spoke of her moods and her artistic temperament as if they were character flaws that the Duke would soon discover to his regret. Annalise did her best to ignore him, retreating further into her own quiet world. One evening, she was descending the main staircase for dinner when Thomas appeared from a shadowy alcove, blocking her path. He had been drinking. His face was flushed, his eyes holding a malevolent gleam. Well, he sneered. "The future Duchess. You look quite pleased with yourself. Caught a very big fish in your little net, haven't you?" "Please let me pass, Thomas," she said, her voice colder than she intended. He stepped closer, invading her space. His proximity was suffocating. "I don't think so. I think you owe your family something. You owe me something. You were promised to me." He reached out and grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh. "Let go of me," she said, her voice low and shaking with a fury that surprised her. "Or what?" he challenged, his grip tightening. "You'll have your Duke throw me in prison? He'll tire of you soon enough. A cold, scribbling little mouse. He'll see what you really are." A cold resolve washed over Annalise, eclipsing her fear. She did not scream. She did not struggle. She met his gaze and spoke with a clarity that cut through his drunken haze. "If you do not release my arm this instant, Thomas," she said, her voice dangerously quiet, "I will not tell the Duke. I will tell your father's creditors. I will tell them that you just assaulted the fiancé of the Duke of Blackwood, and that any association with the Vance name is now a liability of catastrophic proportions. I will see you ruined, not by a duke's power, but by a whisper in the right ear. Now, let me go." His jaw dropped. He stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. The bully in him, so used to her passive resignation, had no defense against this sudden, sharp-edged strength. His fingers loosened, and he stumbled back a step. At that moment, a figure emerged from the drawing room at the bottom of the stairs. It was Alistair. He had seen the entire exchange. His face was a thunderous mask, his eyes blazing with a cold fire she had never seen before. He started up the stairs, his movements swift and predatory. But Annalise held up a hand, stopping him. She looked only at her cousin, her expression unyielding. Thomas paled, turned, and practically fled down the corridor. Annalise took a slow, steadying breath. She looked down at her arm, where red marks were already beginning to form. Then she looked at Alistair. He had stopped where she had bid him, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. The fury was still in his eyes, but it was mingled with something else. "Or, respect, you did not need my protection," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "No," she agreed softly, "I did not." In that moment, the dynamic between them shifted. She was no longer a bewildered girl swept up in a fantasy. She was a woman who had found her own strength, and he was a man who had witnessed it. The space between them was no longer filled with formal awkwardness, but with a new, crackling current of mutual understanding. That night, she could not sleep. The confrontation with Thomas, Alistair's reaction, the dizzying changes in her own heart, it was all too much. She found herself in the moonlit garden, wrapped in a shawl, the night air cool against her flushed cheeks. A footstep on the gravel behind her made her turn. It was Alistair. He carried a heavy cloak, which he draped gently over her shoulders. "You should not be out here alone," he said. "I am not afraid," she answered, which was the truth. They stood in silence for a long time, watching the silver disk of the moon. The questions she had been holding back for weeks rose up, demanding to be spoken. She turned to face him. "Why me?" she asked, the words a mere whisper. "Of all the women in England, why did you choose me? I do not understand." He looked away from her, his gaze fixed on the distant dark line of the woods. His profile was stark in the moonlight, a study in planes and angles she longed to draw. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw with a vulnerability she had never imagined he possessed. "Because you were the only one who did not see me," he said. Annalise frowned in confusion. "What are you talking about? I saw you. In the library." "No," he corrected gently. "You saw a man named Beaumont. You did not see the Duke of Blackwood. You did not see the title, or the fortune, or the power. You saw a man who was disturbing your light." His confession landed in the quiet garden, scattering her composure like a stone thrown at a flock of birds. He explained everything then, the words spilling out of him as if a dam had broken. He told her of his profound disillusionment, of the endless parade of debutantes and their ambitious mothers, all of whom looked at him and saw only a prize. Their flattery was a performance, their affection a transaction. "I grew weary of it," he confessed, his voice laced with a deep old pain. "So I devised a test, a foolish, cynical test. I would have my man learn of a house party attended by one of the young ladies my mother deemed suitable. And I would attend, not as myself, but as Mr. Beaumont, a distant cousin of the host. A man of no consequence. I would watch. He had tested 12 women that season. He described how each, upon learning his true identity from a strategically placed servant, would transform before his eyes. Their conversation would become more animated, their laughter more musical, their interest more pointed. Not one of them had ever failed to perform. "And then," he said, turning to look at her, his eyes dark with memory. There was you. I watched you for a full hour in that library before I ever approached. You were in your own world. You spoke to no one. You looked at no one. You were utterly, completely absorbed in the fall of a shadow. When your uncle brought you away, you gave me a polite nod and walked away. You never looked back. You never asked who I was. You simply dismissed me. He let out a short, humorless laugh. It was the most astonishing thing that had ever happened to me. To be utterly and completely ignored. To be nothing more than an obstruction. It was authentic. It was real. He told her his proposal had been a mad impulse, a desperate gamble on the one real person he had met in a decade. He was not choosing a duchess. He was choosing the woman who preferred shadows to society. The woman who saw the world with an artist's honest eyes. Annalise listened, her heart aching for the lonely man behind the ducal coronet. She understood his cynicism, his desperate search for something true in a world of artifice. But his confession also planted a seed of doubt. Was she just the answer to a test? A novelty? Was their entire relationship founded on a laboratory experiment? So, I am an anomaly, she said softly. An interesting result in your study of human nature. No, he said fiercely, stepping closer. He reached out and touched her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. You are the woman I want to spend the rest of my life with. But I see that my methods were flawed. I have placed you in an impossible position. Before she could answer, a frantic shout came from the house. A footman ran onto the terrace, his face pale with alarm. Your Grace, Sir Reginald, he is in your study, he insisted. Alistair's face hardened. He took her hand. Stay here, he commanded, but Annalise shook her head. A cold premonition washed over her. Whatever her uncle was doing, it involved her. She would not hide from it. She followed him into the house. They found Sir Reginald in Alistair's private study, a decanter of brandy in one hand and a stack of letters in the other. His face was flushed with a mixture of drink and malicious triumph. Your Grace, he slurred, gesturing with the letters. A slight change of plans regarding the nuptials. Alistair's voice was ice. You have 2 seconds to explain your presence in my study before I have you thrown out on your ear. I don't think so, Sir Reginald said with a smirk. You see, I have here some letters. Letters from my late brother, Annalise's dear father. In them, he describes his anxieties, his fears that his daughter inherited her mother's delicate constitution, her melancholic episodes, her retreats from the world. He waved the papers tauntingly. It would be a tragedy, would it not, if society were to learn that the future Duchess of Blackwood suffers from the same malady that drove her mother to a sanatorium. The gossip, the scandal, it would be devastating. Annalise felt the blood drain from her face. It was a lie, a grotesque twisting of her father's loving concern for her quiet, introverted nature into something ugly and unstable. What do you want, Vance? Alistair bit out, his body rigid with contained rage. Simple, her uncle said, his eyes gleaming with greed. A generous settlement. £10,000. And you will break the engagement. Quietly, of course. For her health. Then she will marry my Thomas, as was always intended. Everyone wins. Alistair looked ready to commit murder. He took a step forward, but Annalise moved faster. She walked past him, her head held high, and stood directly in front of her uncle. She felt a strange, liberating calm settle over her. This was the culmination of her entire life, being used as a pawn, a commodity to be traded. And she was finished with it. She held her sketchbook, which she had carried out to the garden. She looked her uncle in the eye. You will not sell me, she said, her voice clear and steady. Not anymore. Then she turned to the Duke. His face was a storm of conflicting emotions, rage at her uncle, concern for her, but she did not look at him as a savior. She looked at him as an equal. "Your Grace," she began, her tone formal but firm. "You sought someone authentic. My uncle's vile schemes are part of the world I wish to leave, but I will not enter a marriage based on a test, a debt, or a rescue. The choice must be real, for both of us." She stepped forward and placed her sketchbook on the polished desk between them. The sound was small, but it echoed in the silent room like a gavel. "This is who I am," she said, her voice ringing with a strength she never knew she possessed. "I am not a diagnosis from a forged letter. I am not a wallflower to be pitied. I am the woman who drew these pictures. If that is the person you wish to marry, and not simply the answer to your test, then I will be your wife. If not," she took a deep breath, "then I will walk out of this house tonight and make my own life, scandal be damned." She had laid her soul bare. The choice was his, but the terms were hers. She had claimed her own value, her own identity, separate from him, from her uncle, from everyone. She would not be an object, not even a prized one. She would be a partner, or she would be nothing. Alistair did not look at her uncle. He did not look at the letters. His eyes were fixed on her face, filled with a profound, aching tenderness. Slowly he reached out and opened the sketchbook. He turned the pages until he found a recent edition, one she had drawn from memory just a few nights ago. It was a sketch of him, from their first meeting in the library. Not the Duke of Blackwood in his finery, but Mr. Beaumont, a quiet, thoughtful man leaning against a bookshelf, the scar on his hand rendered in careful, delicate detail. He looked at the drawing, then back at her. A slow smile spread across his face, the first true, unguarded smile she had ever seen from him. It transformed him, chasing away the last of the shadows. He closed the book. He stood to his full height and turned to Sir Reginald, his expression once again glacial. "Get out," he said, his voice lethally soft. "Get out of my house, and if you ever dare to come near my wife again, I will utterly and completely destroy you." Sir Reginald sputtered, the letters fluttering from his nerveless fingers to the floor. He saw the look on the Duke's face, recognized final, absolute defeat, and scrambled from the room like the craven coward he was. The door slammed shut, leaving Annalise and Alistair alone in the sudden, ringing silence. He turned back to her. He did not speak. He walked to her and gently took her hands in his, turning them over to look at the faint charcoal smudges on her fingertips. He raised her hand to his lips and pressed a soft kiss to her knuckles. "Annalise," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He lifted his head, his warm brown eyes searching hers, and then he leaned down and kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion, but of profound recognition. It was a kiss of homecoming, a quiet promise that they had both finally found a place to be truly seen. Relief washed over her, clean and sharp as the scent of lemons on a summer afternoon. 1 year later, the Duchess of Blackwood stood in the sunniest room of Blackwood Manor. It had once been a gloomy tapestry-hung saloon. Now it was her studio. Light flooded in through massive, newly installed windows, gleaming on the hardwood floors and the dozens of canvases that leaned against the walls. Her work, published under a discreet pseudonym, was causing a stir in the London art world for its unflinching honesty and masterful use of light and shadow. Alistair entered the room, no longer the severe, guarded Duke, but a man at ease in his own home and his own skin. He came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. He looked at the canvas she was working on, a portrait of him, seated in a chair by the window, reading, with their infant son asleep in his lap. The light from the window illuminated his face, a study in peaceful contentment. "You have filled this house with light," he murmured into her hair. Annalise leaned back against him, a soft smile on her lips as she added a touch of white to the page of his book on her canvas. She had once believed the world was made of shadows. But she had been wrong. The shadows were only there to give the light its shape, its meaning, its beauty. True sight was not about observing others from a safe distance, but about allowing yourself to be seen, flaws and all. Love was not a prize to be won in a cynical test, but a quiet, sunlit space to be built together, one honest brushstroke at a time.